This chapter gets into some intriguing issues about the relationship between the economics of media industries in the US and the ideas that are conveyed in media content that is produced by these large media companies. And it also gets into the way in which audiences might conceivably be influenced by these ideas in ways that reinforce the power of those in charge of society. So the main concept that the authors address in this section is the idea of hegemony, all right, which is a concept that was developed by an Italian philosopher, Antonio Gramsci. Gramsci was really interested in exploring why people in a society will follow and go along with the views of those in power, even though sometimes the people in charge of society, the dominant elites of society, are pursuing policies that really aren't in the interests of many citizens in society. So to explain this whole tendency of people in society to support ideas that may not be in their best interest, he developed this idea of hegemony, right? Gramsci argued that many times the culture and media of a society will present certain ideas or views very broadly, all right, and that those ideas and views are often presented so often that people accept them, that people wind up accepting these views as a kind of a common sense folk wisdom about how the world works. So Gramsci defines hegemony as the acceptance of the dominant values in a culture by those who are subordinate to those who hold economic and political power, right? And he argues that these dominant elites in society have to somehow convince people in a society that the interests of the powerful are common sense and somehow normal or natural, the way things should just be. Now, what some scholars have done is to relate Gramsci's notion of hegemony to our media and popular culture today, right? And these scholars argue that our mainstream media that we've been talking about all term are largely owned and operated by these huge corporate conglomerates. Now, some argue that these corporate conglomerates have a vested interest in promoting the existing economic system and structure of our society. All right, these large media conglomerates are vested in promoting the free market economic system, low levels of taxes for the wealthy and corporate elites and corporate corporations, very limited government deregulation, limited government services, right? Now, some scholars argue that when we look at our mainstream media, some scholars make the case that there are certain core ideas that are presented over and over again in the content of media, in television shows and films and popular music, and advertising. And these scholars make the case that these core ideas that are pervasive in our culture are examples of hegemony, that these are hegemonic ideas, all right, that essentially reinforce the legitimacy of the power of corporations, the free market structure of our society, and also legitimize the pronounced inequality that we see between rich and poor in our society, right? And these scholars argue that these core ideas that we see in our culture are presented so regularly that for most people in society that make use of media, most people just kind of accept these ideas as common sense, that they accept these ideas as the way society works and as just a natural part of life, all right? But some of these scholars argue that these ideas are not kind of innate or natural, but they're subjective, they're constructed, and that they are ideas that reinforce the power of those that are in charge, and that these ideas reinforce the status quo. So let me give you some examples of hegemony and hegemonic ideas, just to make this concept a little bit clearer. One hegemonic idea is the idea of consumerism, the idea that to be happy or content or live a fulfilling life, you constantly need to be buying lots of consumer products. That to truly be happy, you constantly need to be shopping, buying, lots of new clothes, a nice car, a more expensive home, and so forth. Right? Now, this idea of consumerism is obviously very prevalent in advertising because ads are constantly trying to sell us products. But some scholars argue that if we look at TV shows and films more generally, that those shows also exalt an idea of consumerism, because we see people in shows wearing expensive clothes, living the good life, living in an expensive home, a really expensive car, and so forth, right? So our popular culture presents consumerism as this ideal. Now, that idea of consumerism obviously serves the needs of American businesses and corporations and advertisers, because it hooks people into this idea that they constantly need to be buying these things that are being marketed by companies. And it discourages people from questioning a life built around consumer products, right? So again, consumerism reinforces this idea of a society oriented around consumer products, right? And again, serves the needs of advertisers and business. Now, another core hegemonic idea is this idea of individualism, rugged individualism. This is the idea that ultimately people are in charge of their own fate and their own destiny, and that people have the ability to succeed based on their own hard work, determination, and perseverance. And some scholars argue that we see this idea of individualism in lots of TV shows and films, in lots of successful books that present these characters that are triumphing over adversity, that people are overcoming obstacles and succeeding through their own hard work. And related to this idea of individualism is the myth of the American dream, that we can all be successful. We all have the capacity to achieve our dreams and our hopes through working hard, applying ourselves, grit and determination. All right. Now you're probably thinking, wow, well, so what's wrong with that? That's a pretty empowering idea, and yes, to some extent, it is. But these ideas of individualism and the myth of the American dream that are so ingrained in our culture also wind up providing a justification for the society that we have now and the inequality that we have. As a society, American society is growing much more inequitable. We have a huge gap between the rich and the poor that is growing and becoming much more intense. Well, individualism and the myth of the American dream implicitly provide an explanation for this economic inequality. Why is it that some of us are so rich and some of us are struggling and poor and homeless? Individualism and the myth of the American dream argue that because we are all in charge of our own destiny and our own fate, that means that those that are rich or are wealthy have succeeded through their own hard work. All right, they deserve their rewards. They deserve all the money they have and the nice life they live because they've worked hard for it. The dark side of these ideas is that people that are poor have only themselves to blame because they're lazy. All right, they're immoral. They have not applied themselves. They simply want to, lie around the house and do nothing, right? So that individualism and the myth of the American dream argue that both the rich and the poor deserve their fate, right? And then it then essentially says to people that this inequality is the way it should be because people are getting just what they deserve. Now, what's interesting is that these ideas of individualism and the American dream don't really address the way in which broader social forces might determine someone's fate, completely apart from one's own work and one's own motivation. For instance, some would say that people that are poor, all right, are born in an impoverished environment, especially for racial minorities. That they wind up going to substandard schools. They don't have the access to the education of people that come from more affluent backgrounds, right? And so that right from the very outset, they have certain obstacles that are very difficult to circumvent, right? In contrast to people that are from more affluent backgrounds, invariably have access to a better education that gives them more opportunities to succeed. All right, and also some people may be unemployed because of structural changes in our economy that with the Great Recession of a few years ago, a lot of people were laid off and struggled with unemployment for an extended period, not because they were lazy, but because of these broader economic forces. All right, so again, individualism, myth of the American dream, present these features of life as being a constant element of our lives. Another hegemonic idea is the representation of government as bad, as something that is immoral, evil, or just incompetent. All right, that TV shows